All right, we are back. Home stretch here, finishing up this rock, paper, scissors game. Really, at this point, what we need to work on, if we go back to our page, looking very, very good. We're capturing the user guesses. Really, we need to update the scores, is really basically the last functionality that we want to kind of add in here. So, looking at that, how we want to do that is now that we know the choices, we need to build in some sort of logic for how we update the score. So we're going to make yet another new function. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make another new function here. And this function is going to be, I'm going to call this function like update score. And this function is going to take in the computer guess and the user guess. So what's going to happen here is we'll receive two arguments. First argument is computer, if I can spell guess. Second argument is user guess. We will compare the values, and if the user guess beats the computer, increase the wins. If the user guess does not beat the computer, increase the loss. If there is a tie, increase the ties. So you get it. We're going to kind of do some error checking or some checking here of the values. And if, for example, I pick rock and the computer picks rock, it'll be a tie. If I pick rock and the computer picks scissors, it'll be a win. If I pick rock and the computer picks paper, the computer will win, so I will lose. So we've got to build the logic around that. So we're going to call this update score method really once we have the values, which is going to be up here. So it can be right after we update the pictures. We can call this update score method. And what I'm going to want to pass it is the computer's guess, because we're going to pass the computer guess as the first argument. And the second argument is going to be the key that the user entered, this event.key, which we continue to use over and over. So when we go down to update the score, this function is going to basically just do some sort of if check. And all I really need it to do is update these variables that we established before, the wins and losses. Like I said, I want to set those every single time. I want to change these in the JavaScript. So when I call this initialize scores method, it can update on the HTML. So right now, when we call initialize scores, we call it every time we press the Q button to go back. We call it when we first load the application. We also call it when we hit the reset button. So we're going to want to update those again anytime we make a guess and update the wins, losses, and ties accordingly. So what we'll do in here is pretty simple. At this point, what we want to do is we want to do an if check. And this is going to be a big if check. We're going to want to check a lot of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 3 statements that I'm going to compare all in one big if statement. So we'll start writing this out and you'll see what that'll look like. But the first thing I want to check, if the user guess is equal to R, and the computer guess is equal to what rock beats scissors, right? So if that's true, or the next thing I want to check, if that's true, I also care about if I guess paper and the computer guesses paper beats rock, or if the user, what's left, scissors, and the computer guesses, that'd be paper, right? Hopefully I'm doing these right, otherwise the scores will be all wrong. I think that's right. So, and let's bring this parentheses back up here. So this is one big if check. So if Let me just open up some brackets. If the user guesses rock and the computer guesses scissors, that's a win. If the user guesses paper and the computer guesses rock, that's a win. And if the user guesses scissors and the computer guesses paper, that's yet again another win. So if any of that happens, what I want to do is I want to increase our wins. So we can say wins equals wins plus 1, or a nice shorthand for that is I can just do wins plus plus, which will increment that wins value by 1. The next thing I want to check, let me back this up. The next thing I want to check is if there's a tie. So else if the computer value equals the user value, if that's true, we'll say ties plus plus. And then if it's anything else, it's a loss, right? We know that. So we don't even need to check anything else. We'll just increase the losses, because if I didn't win and I didn't tie, then I lost. There's no third option, right? So there's nothing else that we can do there. So this will increase our scores. So if I throw rock and the computer picks scissors, the win count will go up. The last thing we need to do in this function right before it closes is we need to update the scores. So we want to call initialize scores. And what that'll do is initialize scores. Where did we put that? Right up here. It will set the value of those HTML elements to the current value of the wins. So I think that looks good. Let's test this out and see if that works. So we're going to refresh the screen. I'm going to hit R. So now if I hit rock, the computer picks scissors, so I win. And you're seeing the wins go up. If I hit paper, so we have another tie. Scissors, paper, so I win. And I'm just going to hit rock like a whole bunch of times, and you can see these scores updating all the time. If I hit reset score, this should go back to 0. I'm hitting reset score. If I hit Q and then go back, yeah, my scores are not resetting. So what did we do there? Did we get an error? No. We still have this console log, which we should definitely delete. Let's take a look. Probably something simple. First, let's get rid of that console log because that's annoying. We don't need this. And I think we have another one somewhere. No, I guess we got rid of it. So when we press the reset button, we call, okay, I see what happened. So maybe you caught this, maybe you didn't. What's happening is when we click the reset button, it's calling initialize scores. And what does initialize scores do? Initialize scores sets the value of the text content to wins, losses, and ties, which at the time was 0. But now we've been increasing those values in other functions. So instead of calling initialize scores, we probably want to actually make a new function that's basically just going to update the content. So initialize scores is going to do something different for us now. Initialize scores is going to reset those values for us. That's really what we want this to do. So this will reset the values of wins, losses, and ties all back to 0. So we'll get rid of that. So when I call this method or this function, it will reset our variables wins, losses, and ties back to 0 because I may increase them somewhere else. And then what this function then needs to do is call a new function that we'll call display scores. Display scores, we'll put this one right below it. What display scores is going to do for us, let me just paste this in before I forget. What display scores is going to do for us is it is going to be a function that will that will update the HTML values of the scores to the values in the JavaScript file. Right, that makes sense. And now initialize scores, it will actually do what we told it would do, but it'll actually do it correctly. So now when we call display scores, which is actually really what we want to call here, when we update the scores here, we're going to call display score. So when these variables change, every time they change, I'm going to call this function called display scores. That's going to make sure I have the most up-to-date info, which was happening before. But when I hit the reset button now, it will reset those values to 0, and then it'll recall display scores, which should give us the effect that we were looking for. So let's take a look at that, make sure that worked. Again, you may have caught this as you were watching the video, but that was just a mistake on my part. So I'm going to hit rock a whole bunch of times, and paper a bunch, and scissors a bunch. So you can see I have a whole bunch of scores. If I hit reset, you can see my scores have gone back down to 0. I'm going to hit rock a whole bunch more times again, hit P, hit S. I'm going to reset again, rock again. I'm going to hit Q, and then I'm going to go back in with R, and my scores have been reset. So this looks like it's working kind of exactly how I wanted it to work. So I feel like we're in a really good position with that. So I think at this point, we're sitting pretty. You know, we have an application that works. We have an application where we're able to capture the guesses from the user. We're able to update the scores. We're able to display the relevant info on the screen. We're doing nice error checking. We're doing a lot of good stuff here. You know, looking back through the code, we have some very good documentation, I think. We didn't leave any console logs left over. We have this nice little hidden Easter egg. And I think you could go through and kind of build off of this code a little bit, and you may clean some stuff up. You know, I was kind of making it up as I went. So there's opportunities here where we can make some of these functions, you know, maybe a little bit smaller or maybe a little bit more reusable. But I think coming in, you know, this is not a bad starting spot to be at. And something that, you know, obviously works and can continue to be enhanced with either HTML or CSS or just some more JavaScript stuff. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with what we were able to accomplish here. So just kind of looking at that application once again, you know, we have this nice landing page, gives us the rules. If we press R, P, or S, we'll jump right into our game board. If we press Q, we'll go back. If we press any of those letters again, we'll go back in here. Our pictures are updating dynamically. Our scores are being reset. And I think this is a pretty fun rock, paper, scissors game. So I really hope you enjoyed following along with that. Hopefully we learned a lot. Spent a lot of time on these videos and much more than we would have ever had the opportunity to in class. So really tried to beat things home, to drill some of these things into our head. So hopefully these things make sense. If anything that I went over here in these videos didn't make sense, definitely feel free to shoot me a Slack message or talk in office hours or talk in class. Be happy to elaborate on any of these things. Thanks so much for watching the videos, and I will see you later. Have a great day.